Welcome back to the Awesome Agents podcast. Today we're talking about a safety benchmark paper that I think deserves more attention than it's getting.
Yeah, and the headline number is 81.8% attack success rate, but honestly, that's not even the most interesting part of the story.
So let's start at the beginning. What is JBDistill and who built it?
It's a framework from a Johns Hopkins PhD candidate named Jingyu Zhang, built during an internship at Microsoft Research, published at EMNLP 2025, getting wider attention this week.
And what's the core idea?
So most safety benchmarks are static. You build a list of adversarial prompts, you test the model against them, you report a refusal rate. JBDistill argues that model is broken because those fixed prompt lists end up in public repos, get scraped into training runs, and the model learns to refuse them specifically.
So you're measuring whether the model memorized the test, not whether it's actually safe.
Exactly. And JBDistill's answer is to make the benchmark renewable. You produce a fresh set of adversarial prompts every time you need to evaluate a new model.
That sounds expensive though. How do you make it practical?
That's the clever part. You don't run those attacks against your expensive frontier model. You run them against cheap, small, open source models first. 8 attack algorithms, 4 small models, Llama 2.7b, Llama 3.1 to 8b, Gemma 2.9b, Olmeho 2.7b. You generate a huge pool of candidates and then filter down to the ones that actually transfer.
So the small models are a cheap test environment and only the survivors get pointed at the real target.
Right. And the filtering step is called rank by success, which just ranks prompts by how well they performed on those dev models. Simple idea, but it beat every other selection strategy they tested.
And that configuration is what got them to 81.8%.
Across 13 different target models, covering chat models, reasoning systems, specialized coding, and healthcare variants. For context, Wild Jailbreaks, a well-known static benchmark, got 63.2% on the same targets.
Okay, so a meaningful gap. And what about the older static approaches?
HarmBench was at 18.4%, Dan prompts at 27.4%. So the difference between fresh renewable prompts and classic static ones isn't subtle.
I want to push on something though. What are the real limitations here?
A few that matter. The first one is English only. Multilingual jailbreaks are a serious real-world attack vector, and they're completely outside scope. The paper lists it as future work.
And I noticed the seed set is pretty narrow, just 200 goals.
Right, 200 harmful goals across 7 categories. That's enough to show the concept, but real adversarial evaluation covers much longer tails, social engineering, jurisdiction-specific harms, subtly misleading outputs.
What about the dev models? They're all pretty small, under 10 billion parameters. Does that limit what attacks you can find?
That's an open question the paper acknowledges but doesn't fully answer. Attacks that transfer from a Llama 2.7b may or may not generalize to architectures trained very differently.
There's also no severity grading, right? The benchmark doesn't distinguish between a mild policy violation and something actually dangerous.
That's the one I'd flag most. The judge model scores outputs as harmful or not harmful. It doesn't assess real-world severity. You could hit 81.8% without producing anything that causes material harm.
So 81.8% is a measure of rule-breaking outputs, not necessarily dangerous ones.
For context, yes. Though I'd add that a framework hitting that rate against models specifically trained to refuse harmful content is still a significant result.
What's the current status on actually running this yourself?
The benchmark dataset is up on GitHub at microsoft.jailbreak-installation in HarmBench format. But the full pipeline code for running your own regeneration, that's listed as pending.
There's something a bit ironic about that given the whole pitch is renewability.
A little, though one thing the paper does show is that adding more dev models and attack algorithms to the candidate pool keeps improving results, with no ceiling found yet.
So the approach scales over time.
Which is truly different from every other benchmark that gets weaker as models train against it.
So what's the real test here? Not of the models, but of the people running the labs.
Right. The question is whether safety teams treat JBDistill as yet another static artifact to patch around, in which case it decays like everyone before it. Or whether they actually run the regeneration workflow as part of their release process. The framework is there, whether the incentive structure is there is a different problem.
Thanks, Maya. That's JBDistill from Johns Hopkins and Microsoft Research. Paper and GitHub links are in the show notes. See you next time.